A lot of what we're going to be going over is from a class that I teach called Scaling Ventures. And it's based on this book, Scaling Lean. And so after this session, if you want a little bit more of this kind of thing, this is the book that it's kind of based on. So, and I'll be sharing these slides with you after the fact as well. I'll share just a little bit about me. And then I'd like to hear a little bit about you and your unique value proposition. And then also we'll be revisiting your canvases. You guys have developed canvases for these concepts, is that right? I just want to double check.
They've done the Lean Launch Canvas and the Business Model Canvas.
So the business model canvas. Okay, that's what we'll be pulling back up. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a traction model. You're going to figure out your general success criteria as well as honing in on your early adopters and perhaps thinking about your customer lifetime value. And then we'll close with a customer factory, and that's designed to really help you for the next session. I commonly like to tell entrepreneurs, like, yeah, your projections are really kind of, you know, you're shooting a dart at a dartboard, but if you at least have an idea of where you're shooting, you're not going to throw a dart and end up on the backside of the room. So that's kind of what you'll have at the end of this. This is just kind of a visual resume for some of my startup experience. I've been involved in some biotech firms, some athletic wear. Animal welfare is a really big part of my heart. And so I was involved in Pets Broward, which was an initiative to launch a low-cost spay and neuter program, and then done some online entrepreneurship education. And I won't go too deep into any of it, but I do want to hear a little bit about you. And so I'm going to actually put this template in the chat. And what I'd like you to do is introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, but you will be filling this out for your concept. So the overall plan for this session is you've already documented your plan. You've got that business model canvas. We need to focus now on what are the riskiest parts of your plan, the parts that aren't as certain, and then figure out ways to really test your plan almost in the smallest ways possible. So for example, I'm coaching a student and she wants to do an art studio. So we're trying to figure out how we could do a pop-up studio as a small kind of test. And so we're going to be trying to figure out ways that you can kind of test these different concepts that you've either already launched or are thinking of launching. This is kind of a product journey or a company journey, if you will. And even though some of you are here with ideation or bootstrapping, meaning you're self-funding it to launch, ideally, we want to be able to scale it and grow and then get up to what we call a point of scale. And the example that I like to talk about is GoPro. So you're familiar with GoPro, those cameras, right, that you mount on helmets or bikes or surfboards or whatever in order to capture what they're doing. They had some significant growth events in the beginning. And one of them was getting into Best Buy, which was a huge growth event for them. They were also picked up by REI, which was another huge event for them. And then they were also featured on QVC. And so they were able to successfully get about there. They weren't able to actually get to the point of scale. And we'll be looking at your concepts, figuring out what do they look like at scale. This is a business model canvas that I just filled out for GoPro. So, the problem I said was videoing extreme sports close-up and being alone, right? When you're surfing, you can't capture, your buddy can't like surf next to you while you're surfing. And then the value proposition that I created here is video that captures anything and anywhere without a photographer. And then, just filling out some other pieces, early adopters or they're passionate extreme sports users. And as they grew, they actually started to become a big fan of like families when they would go on vacations. And in looking at the weakest parts of the plan, you'll see that I've highlighted unfair advantage. And so this is kind of that advantage we were talking about at the end of your value proposition. And then their revenue streams. So The unfair advantage that they had is they did have some patents, but the challenge with it was a combination of existing technology. It wasn't necessarily anything brand new. And I think it was 2015, Apple actually got awarded a patent for a mountable camera. And so they were really at risk when that happened. And additionally, their celebrity sponsorships, they picked up really great celebrities in the sports arena, but when they would get to a certain point, GoPro couldn't even afford them anymore. So they would go to the bigger brands like Red Bull, et cetera, et cetera. Their last weakness, in my opinion, was their revenue streams. They just sold cameras. That's all that they did. And so they tried to expand on their revenue streams and bring in something else aside from a camera. They decided to launch this product you see here, the GoPro Karma. And it was a drone, and they didn't really do a lot of the front end work before they launched this, and they had a lot of quality problems. And these are just some of the headlines when they launched. So, you know, bad karma, how GoPro went from super cool to almost bankrupt. The end for GoPro, the downfall of a giant. And I mean, these things were crashing out of the sky and like hitting people in the head. And it was just a complete disaster. So they weren't able to get past that point because they weren't able to figure out what their next moves were. So while we're focusing here, I'm going to kind of push you guys to think big scale, right? Like, where will you be and how will you be able to build the business? And I actually just pulled up their stock history. I guess it was right after the market closed. And you can see this really big peak, right? All these big growth events, and they're just dwindling on, dwindling on. They've never been able to recover. And so that's what we want. We want to be able to recover. This is what we don't want. What I'm going to ask everybody to do is take a look at that business model canvas and figure out what's the most uncertain part. And there may be more than one. I mean, it could just be one, but what's the part of the canvas that you filled out that you're like the most unsure about? All right, so how did that go? Was that, you thinking about the canvas perhaps in a different way, perhaps? So this is the same graph that I showed earlier, but this is the traction model, essentially, is what it is. And you'll see this timeline here, 36 months. When we think about the opposite of GoPro, Facebook has had tremendous scale, right? And when they were first figuring it out, they only had about 100,000 users, because at that point they were really trying to figure out what people liked, what they were using, and then they quickly scaled up, and 10 million active users was their scale point. But now, today, they have 1.69 billion users on Facebook. And it's because they really focused in on that problem solution fit at the very beginning. And then they knew where their next customers were coming from. And so whether you're just starting out, we've got to figure out where we start. But if you're already in operations, we figure out where we go next. This is kind of the fundraising valuation over time, and you can see it just goes up and up and up and up. And if we look at their stock price, it's the exact opposite of GoPro, because they're continuously figuring out where their next customers are coming from. So this is what we want. GoPro is what we don't want. And at this point, Troy, this is where the poll will come in. I want each of you to think about 3 years from now, right? This 36 months out, what would be your minimum level of success in terms of revenue? Would it be 100,000 a year, 1 million a year, 10 million a year? Are you thinking really big and it's 1 million a year or 100 million a year? What would be your minimum success criteria 3 years from now? And these are big buckets, so. All right, so remember that number, because we're going to come back to it. We're going to revisit it, and it's going to kind of all make sense at the end. So I think that was everybody. So almost a 50-50 split. You guys can see the results because they're on my screen. But more millionaires than 100, that's great. So the way we want to think about it, or the way that I like to think about it, is this is, if you've ever had like a product development, training or class or whatever, this is kind of like the product cycle that they've kind of developed. And over here we have innovators, and then we have early adopters. And so if we think about Apple is a good one. When Apple comes out with a brand new product, like something completely new, like the iPhone. When the iPhone very, very first came out, not everybody bought the iPhone. It was these innovators, right? These people who wanted to experiment with new technology. And then their early adopters, once you get to a certain point, you cross what's called the chasm. And then you start getting into early majority and late majority and what we call laggards, because my mom finally got an iPhone. No worries, no worries. So this is where we need to cross. And so we really want to figure out who your early adopters are. Who are those people that are excited about your product and are going to help you cross the chasm in order to get to scale. So this is what we're going to do is like a market segmentation. And let's see, maybe Joe, maybe you can provide us some insight here, because it's on fitness equipment. And I've just created two axes, so high tech and durable. So if it's up here, it's really high tech. If it's over here, it's really durable equipment. And then obviously the opposite there. So here's a picture of a hammer strength machine. And if you've seen these in the gym, there's not really a lot of technology to them. It really just works off of leverage. You pull those things down and the weights are there, but they're really tough, heavy machines. And so if we were going to plot this on our market segmentation chart, I'd put it down here. It's pretty durable, right? But it's not really high tech. If you've seen this machine, the Precors, these are in the gym, the ellipticals. And so if we think about this machine, it's not quite as durable, right? It's got some plastic parts to it. Some of them wobble sometimes, but it does have a little bit of technology in it, because it, will track your time and track your strokes and your strides and all of those kind of things. So I think I would put it, and this is just my opinion, not as durable, not really high tech, but not low tech. Another example, if you've seen these Cybex machines, these are like also kind of like ellipticals, but they're a little more sturdy. What's the laugh out loud? Machine designed by Satan. Oh my gosh. These are a little bit more sturdy. I actually find them a little bit more fun, because you kind of like swish, swish, swish. And so I would tend to put this machine a little more durable, a little bit more high tech than the Precor, because it does use some different leverage technology in order to get you that kind of flow. Another example here. So this is Nordic Tracks. I don't know if you've seen this commercial, and they have pre-programmed runs, and you can go up hills, and then you can use weights and all of those kinds of things, the Nordic Track, but it's mainly for home. It's home equipment. We could put that a little bit more techie than the Cybex machine, the Wookie Wookie one. That's a technical term, Wookie Wookie. And but not quite as durable as the Cybex machine. So we're starting to get some grouping here is what's happening. And I'll have you take a look at this machine. This is real. I didn't make it up.
They have that at Game Time.
Do they really?
It's
a reaction game.
It's like Fruit Ninja. Yeah, kill it.
Oh my gosh. I think that this is just, I don't know if well, whatever, but I'm putting that not durable, even though they're calling themselves rugged, but it does have some technology in it, because I feel like if you punch in that thing, it's just going to fall over. I just don't think it looks very sturdy. Okay, so another example. I don't know if you remember these from back in the day. Fan bikes. Right? Yeah, don't they look so happy riding their fan bikes?
They're my favorite.
That's your favorite. I think my mom had one of these too. So I'm going to put these guys down here, Body Rider, right? Not durable, not high tech. And so we're starting to see these groupings. And if we were going to name these segments with the type of users that use these kinds of machines, we might call the hammer strength the hardcore lifters. These are people who want to gain muscle, they know what they're doing in the gym, and they are just focused on being a hardcore lifter. And these are just names I came up with. Over here with our fan bike and our pre-core, we might call them at-home procrastinators, right? Those fan bikes usually become like clothing hangers for bedrooms. And then the rugged interactive, the punching machine, I'd call them no clue what they are doing gamers. That's me. And then we've got the Nordic Track and the Cybex. Might call those change it up lifers. So these are people who are really looking for the next thing because they're either bored with their current routine, but they still are dedicated to fitness. So they order the Nordic Track, you know, they get the Cybex. They're always looking for that next thing. And so the way to think about who your early adopters are, there's three main criteria. They have a problem, they know they have a problem, and they're actively seeking a solution. Those are going to be your early adopters, the people that get you over that chasm. So really focusing on who those are. So if we think about Peloton, right, that bike that has all those classes online and streaming and everything. If we think about the different segments that we just went over, what might be the early adopter for Peloton?
Change it up lifers.
The change it up lifers, right? They're actively looking for a new fitness experience. And so really focusing in on change it up lifers. Yeah, okay, Troy sent me a message. So what I'd like you to do, we're gonna do another breakout. And what I'd like you to try and take a stab at, and you only have 15 minutes, it's gonna go by quick. But in your former breakouts, what are two things that make you different from the competitors? And then if you could come up with maybe 4 or 5 examples of competitors and plot them and try to create groups of customers. And at that point, figure out who your early adopters are and then come up with a fun name for them, like a change it up lifer or something like that. And we'll all kind of report back on what our names of our early adopters are. And cool, well, this was designed to really help you guys, and I'll just share my screen so you guys can see the slides and stuff, but to give you, kind of similar to how we did with the business model canvas, to give you a different look at your business. This gives you, I think, a really clear idea of who to target, right? In order to get to that next step. There is a worksheet if you want to dig down deeper into this. We won't do it today in the class, but one of the things to think about is what their behaviors are. And this sheet is kind of designed to help you think through that. So if we go back to my example, I just kind of filled it out loosely. So the problem with change it up lifers is they get tired of workout routines. But then you're asking about behaviors. And so, for example, they see a physical therapist, right? Because they work out so much. And so they see a physical therapist. So if I was Peloton, I might want to partner with physical therapists or at least have a brochure in the office because Peloton is a low impact activity because it's a bike. Another example, they compete in Tough Mudders and et cetera, so that might be an option to attend some of these events in order to meet folks and kind of spread the word. And that might be a great way to kind of test it. So this is just another step in the process if you want to think through what their behaviors are and where they go and what they do in order to just give you a few more ideas of how to get in front of these early adopters. So your minimum success criteria, we had, I think it was 4 million, and then we had 100,000. Well, in order to get there, how many active customers do you have to have in order to get to that minimum success criteria? What is your adopter worth to you potentially a month or a year? Is it worth $1 a month, $1,000 a month? And thinking through this, what the customer's worth to you on a monthly basis works also if you don't have a recurring business model. You can just say it's a one-time thing, and then that's your lifetime value. But you want to think about what the customer is going to be paying you. And so this is going back to Peloton, just to keep the example consistent. So if they wanted to get to $10 million in revenue, then you have this revenue target up here, right? Their yearly revenue target's 10 million. We need to figure out what the yearly customer revenue is. So we're basically looking at $10 million. And for a Peloton user, they're saying that their customer lifetime value is $1,200 because you pay $50 a month. I think it might be like $39.99 or something, but we'll keep the math easy. They pay $50 a month for 12 months, right? And we assume that they're going to stay with us for 2 years. And so that math is basically 50 times 12 times 2 will get you to that $1,200 in lifetime value. And so essentially what you do is you divide that $10 million annual revenue that they're trying to get to by 1,200. And so they've got to bring in 8,333 new customers a year, because if they're rotating every 2 years, they've got to continually keep bringing in new customers. And so the idea here is to figure out, what is one customer worth to you? And then you divide that into your success criteria. And that gives you an idea of how many new customers you've got to be bringing in. Now, Peloton did a brilliant move. I'm not sure when it was. I think it was earlier this year. But one other thing to think about is with your price, it should be based on the value that you provide, not necessarily the cost it costs to provide it. Because customers will pay additionally for value. And so when you get to a point, it's always a question of, if you could double your pricing and not lose more than half of your customers, what would that look like? So before we had 16,000 active customers, and then we needed to bring in 8,333 new customers in order to get to our revenue target. Well, what Peloton decided to do was start financing their bikes. And so they would zero money down, zero APR, because the bikes are like $2,300 or something like that. And that was a really big, what you call adoption hurdle. And so they basically doubled their revenue from each customer that's choosing to finance their bike. And instead of 16,000 active customers bringing in 8,000 new ones, they've easily brought those numbers down to 8,000 active customers and 4,000 new customers. So just kind of keep this in mind as you're thinking about your pricing and what your customer lifetime value estimate is. And it doesn't have to be precise, but it's going to, again, kind of get you to figure out what that dartboard in the room is, so that at least when you throw the dart, it's not going right behind you. And I'll share these slides, and it's very simple math, and it's fun to kind of actually play around with it. And this is Peloton stock price, and you can see the trend there. Interesting that it started to spike right around when the coronavirus started surging. Kind of wish I would have invested back around here, but you can't see it all coming, but thought that was interesting. And I think that they'll continue to grow. That's my prediction. So your next 10 customers, do we know where those are coming from? So once you get your first 10, how are you going to get to your next 10? And we need to be crystal clear about your offer. And I think that you'll see this in some of your other classes. But one thing that Peloton does really well is it communicates their pricing, their value proposition, and they demo it all at the same time on their website. And so I think this is hyperlinked here. And if we just look at the landing page for Peloton, I mean, it's kind of high tech, I realize that, but you'll be wanting to put together some kind of like landing pages in order to test customer reaction and things like that. And so obviously we're not going to have fancy video like this, but you immediately get what their offer is. And so thinking about what your value proposition is, and thinking about how you can even somewhat demo your product or service using a website is something else to think about. And I think that that's something that Peloton does really, really well. So the next thing, and this is going to be, I think we're only going to do 2 more breakouts after this, and this one will be kind of quick. This is what's called a customer forces map, and I think that we have that in a file. If not, let me put that in the chat. But what I want you to do is revisit that early adopter, you know, the Ken and Barbies and the bougie hipsters and the bro vets and the party pirates and all of that. And what are the triggers that push your customer to seek a solution? So for example, with Peloton, what would be some of the triggers that would cause a Change It Up lifer to have pain and be attracted to what Peloton's offering?
So when I see Peloton or whatever, I just see goals. Like I see a goal-based machine, if you will. So basically, it would attract people that are like goal setters. Like Apple, for example, with their watch, the activity rings. You ask anybody that wears an Apple Watch, they have to close their rings. So it's like we have to close them. You just have to.
Right.
Whether it's 400 or 10,000, as long as you close them, you succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they might be goal oriented, wanting to hit another goal. And so because Peloton's very goal based, that would be some of this success attribute. The other part of it, and I think that a lot of entrepreneurs miss this part, is the anxiety around making that purchase decision. And so what Peloton did really well was reduce the barrier of the cost of the bike, because that was a big anxiety thing for people to invest in a $2,300 bike. And then what are some of the habits that might hold the customer back? Well, in the case of Peloton, it could just be laziness, right? And so a big part of the marketing and the value proposition language tackles the anxiety and the habits that are holding your customer back. And so finding ways to reduce that anxiety and cause a habit to come towards you is kind of what you're looking at. And so the sheet that's actually in the chat, it's laid out a little bit differently. But what I'd like you to do is think about the triggering events, and you can dig into this on your own in more detail, but mainly this triggering event. What are the consideration sets? Meaning, what are their options for solving this triggering event? And then really just kind of focus on this anxiety and uncertainty. So really just work on these 3 boxes for now, just to kind of get this process going. All right, I think we're all back. So again, you can really dig into this sheet for your early adopters and go deep into it. We just don't have the time today to kind of go through each one of these, but I encourage you to really get into the mindset of it. And since we've kind of touched on it, I'm going to show you one more tool. This will be our last breakout, and then I'm going to come back and show you one more thing that you can kind of do on your own and have some fun with. But this, to me, is a really nice visual way to think about how customers move through your customer factory, if you will. So like this is your customer factory, and you want your customers moving through all of these different steps. And so we're really kind of focused. So your revenue target is obviously what we were talking about, you know, your minimum success criteria, but really drilling down and thinking about how you acquire your customers and how you activate them, how you retain them, and then how they refer you to others. And so a recent example, I had StormSmart actually come give me a quote. StormSmart is a company that does hurricane shutters and things of that sort. And so in terms of acquisition, you know, they have partnered, I think, with Wink News with their hurricane brochure thing that they hand out at Publix. They sponsor a lot of things. They do a lot of charity work. They have commercials and sponsor the news. And so those are all tactics for how they acquire their customers. It's kind of like how they find you. And then the next step is that activation step. And the way to think about the activation step is that it's that first value experience that the customer has with you. And this is before a purchase. So for example, in my experience, this spunky little fast talking lady came over to the house, right? And tried to form the relationship and, you know, give their advice and blah, 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 blah. And she was very knowledgeable. She was an excellent salesperson. And that's kind of that first activation experience. Now, StormSmart could be considered like a one-time purchase. Like you're not going to continually buy storm shutters for your house. But if I was to come up with a retention strategy, you know, perhaps they could offer, you know, if you ever move, you have a lifetime, you know, 10% off your next purchase for being with us, right? And there's some kind of value there because people do move and that could happen. I didn't see any kind of referral program, but I would think that that would be something that they could easily implement. Typically referral programs are mistaken as word of mouth being a strategy. So a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, if they're giving a pitch or something like that, they say, well, our main strategy is going to be word of mouth. Well, word of mouth is something that happens because you're doing something to make that happen. And that's some kind of referral program or something along those lines to encourage those customers to talk to other people about your company. And so this was just kind of an example. We've already got this revenue thing kind of figured out. But if we could go back out into breakout groups and let's do 8 minutes again, come up with some ideas for how you could acquire, activate, retain customers, and then how you could encourage referrals. And then this is all going to make sense at the very end when I show you this fun little tool that you can play around with these numbers. All right, so hopefully that helped you drill down even further into your early adopters. And I mean, even if you're at the idea stage, it's really important to think through these steps in this process, because the biggest weakness that I've always seen in pitches is a specific customer acquisition strategy. So really thinking how you're gonna get in front of that customer. And so now at the end of this, you've got, and again, I told you I was a visual person, you've got two kind of visual tools to be able to change and mess with and almost like these are like very early like prototypes of your business in a sense. And the nice thing about these visual tools is it's not, you know, so if you write out your marketing plan and live plan, for example, and then you'd want to change something, you have to rewrite the whole section. With these tools, you can easily just flip things around and just keep having a visual check-in on your concept and then your customer acquisition strategy. And the other thing, the last thing I want to share with you, and I found this tool just really fascinating. These are all tools from LeanStack, which is the same author of the text that I talked about at the beginning. And you sign up for an account at leanstack.com and they will try and get you to do a paid version. But the free one actually has some pretty cool tools. So we can go in, we'll create a new project here. So I'm already logged in. I've gone to leanstack.com. So we can start a new project and we'll call it, let's go with Party Pirates, since we had that as an early adoption. So they have the lean canvas here that you can go in and you can actually fill in if you wanted to go in and do that. And then you can do multiple ones as well. But what they also have, which I really like, is their traction roadmap. So these are different types of business models. From what I'm hearing, these are all direct business models with maybe the exception of the social media platform. That might be a multi-sided model, but we're just going to go with the direct here. And so we'll hit continue. And we're revisiting that minimum success criteria that we set earlier. And so we'll just go with, do the 100,000. Let me delete that. That looks weird. And then you hit continue. And so this is going to ask you about your revenue. So this is kind of going back to that lifetime value that we talked about. So you can just do a one-time if your customer just does a one-time purchase, like in the case with StormSmart, or if there's a monthly type of recurring revenue, you can enter that here. Or if it's just a yearly revenue. So let's say for example, the boat charter, you know, maybe it's just used twice a year. And so your typical customer is going to be bringing in, I don't know, 2,000 a year. I just make that up. But let's go back and let's just do a simple example. We'll say we have a monthly recurring thing. So let's say it's $50 a month. And then you hit continue. And then we go back to that lifetime value. So the average time you expect to retain a customer. So we'll go back to Peloton. We said 50 a month. We'll say 2 years and we hit continue again. And these are your acquisition and conversion percentages. So if you had a website and you were selling something online, you could enter these conversion rates, but they just recommend setting it at 10% if you don't have it, and that's completely fine. And so we'll hit continue again. And then your referral rate, they recommend setting it initially to 0 until you actually have some traction. You're not going to know what your referral rate is. And your growth and scale, we're just going to keep it at 10 times. And we hit continue. And so here's what you get. You get this customer factory blueprint, but it actually has numbers in there. And it will actually tell you, so out of 3,500 exposures, maybe you get 350 signups, right? And it's gonna actually give you your target. So for here, we have 167 active customers. So in order to get there, 138 current customers plus 35 new ones. And if you go down, you can kind of see the timeline over time based on this model. So if this isn't specific, again, it's more dartboard oriented, but you can go in and you can play around with these different assumptions and use this in your pitch and say, here's what we're assuming. You can download these and they'll try to get you to do the upgraded version, but this free version works just fine in my opinion. But of course, if you want to go more in depth with it, please feel free. It's a great site. But at the end of this, this is kind of what we've done. So we've done your value proposition. We've figured out the weak parts of your overall business model. We figured out your minimum success criteria, at least broadly, and the number of customers you might need. You've thought about your lifetime value of your customer, clarified your early adopters, and worked on your customer forces and factory blueprint. So moving forward, and I don't think that this is incorporated in the program, but if you want to dive deeper into this, I'd encourage you to dive deeper into that customer forces worksheet. Think about your customer factory blueprint and other actions in there. The author of The Lean Startup, which the book is kind of based on this lecture, has a YouTube channel too, so you could check him out if you'd like. And hopefully this was somewhat of value to you guys. I was really trying to give you a bunch of tools and different ways to think about your business and your concept in the early phases, and even if it's beyond the early phases. And so I know we're 1 minute past 8, but are there any questions or comments? Was this helpful to you? Good, I got a thumbs up. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jose. Thumbs up, good. Awesome. All right. What? Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. So Troy, I don't know if you have any housekeeping notes, but that's all I have for this evening.